All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're heading back in time, way back to the dawn of aviation, to look at one single tragic flight that pretty much changed everything. This is the story of the exact moment the amazing dream of flight collided with its first, harsh, fatal reality. So picture this. The year is 1908. We're only 5 years, just five, past the moment the Wright brothers proved that a powered, heavier-than-air machine could actually fly. At this point, aviation isn't a normal thing. It's a spectacle. It's dangerous, it's thrilling, and honestly, it's a totally unproven science that has everybody's imagination running wild. And on this one particular September afternoon, two men are climbing into an aircraft. And I mean, this thing is made of basically just wood, wire, and cloth. That's it. One of them, he's the pioneer, the guy who literally unlocked the secret of flight. And the other, he's a soldier, a military man, and his job is to figure out if this crazy new invention could completely change the face of warfare. Their flight was only going to last a few minutes, but it would end in total disaster. And in doing so, it would mark a really somber but absolutely critical milestone in our history. So, what went wrong? That's the big question, and that's exactly what we're going to answer. We're going to reconstruct what happened that day, we'll take a look at the world's first ever aviation accident investigation, and we'll see how this awful tragedy actually helped to make the skies safer for all of us. So, why were they even up there? Well, this wasn't some casual afternoon joyride. Not at all. This was a super high-stakes public demonstration. The entire future of military aviation was literally on the line. Okay, so in the pilot's seat, you have Orville Wright himself. I mean, one of the most experienced pilots on the planet at the time. And right next to him is Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, who's there for the U.S. Army Signal Corps. Now, Selfridge wasn't just some passenger along for the ride. No way. He was a skilled aviator himself, and he was the Army's official observer for this incredibly important test. And you gotta understand, the Army was watching. A huge crowd had gathered at the Fort Myer parade ground in Virginia. The Wright brothers had to prove that their machine was reliable, that it was controllable, and that it was actually practical for military stuff like reconnaissance. The pressure on them was just immense. So, the stage is set. They take off. And for a few short moments, everything is perfect. The flight is a total success, a perfect showcase of this brand new technology. But then, things went catastrophically wrong. Okay, let's look at the timeline. At 5 p.m. sharp, they're airborne. By 5:03, just 3 minutes in, they're circling gracefully at about 100 feet up. But only 1 minute after that, the first hint of trouble shows up. And by 5:05, it's all over. We're talking about a span of maybe 60 seconds, where a routine flight turned into a desperate fight for survival. And what's really fascinating, and kind of chilling, is the specific detail that people on the ground remembered. They said it wasn't a big bang or an explosion. It was this sharp, repeating sound, a rhythm. That was the sound of the aircraft literally tearing itself apart in midair. So, after the crash, the U.S. Army did something that had never, ever been done before for a powered airplane. They launched a formal accident investigation. They absolutely had to figure out what happened. And what they were looking for was something called a catastrophic failure. I mean, it's a term we use all the time now, right? But back then, for aviation, it was a pretty new idea. It just means that a part didn't just bend or get damaged. It completely and totally broke down, leading to the entire system just failing. And what they found was this incredible, tragic chain reaction. It all started with a single wooden propeller that they'd actually modified for the flight. First, it cracked. Then, it shattered. A piece of that shattered propeller went flying backward and just sliced right through a super important wire that held the rudder steady. The second that wire was cut, the whole tail assembly twisted, and boom, Orville Wright had zero directional control. So the official findings really boil down to this. The main cause? That Wright propeller failing. But a huge contributing factor was that they were using new, longer propellers, and those created stresses that nobody had planned for. But the one thing, the critical failure that really sealed their fate, was that severed rudder wire. So the investigation gave them answers, for sure, but the crash itself left a permanent mark. You know, this wasn't just about a mechanical failure. This had a real, profound human cost, and it created a legacy that would shape the future of aviation forever. Orville Wright was badly hurt, but he survived. He would even fly again. Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, however, wasn't so lucky. When the plane hit the ground nose first, his head struck one of the wooden support beams. He died that evening from a skull fracture. becoming the very first person to be killed in the crash of the powered airplane. This one crash was just a brutal wake-up call for everyone. The initial romance of early flight, it suddenly slammed into the hard reality of engineering. It proved that just being brave and having good intuition wasn't going to be enough. For aviation to have a future, it needed science, it needed standards, and it needed strict, rigorous testing. And the changes came fast, and they were huge. Because of what happened to Selfridge, aviation started to grow up, really. Propellers started getting stress tested, detailed pre-flight inspections became standard procedure, people started thinking about safety gear, like helmets. And maybe most importantly, that whole idea of a formal accident investigation, it became a cornerstone of air safety from that day forward. Lieutenant Selfridge's death was the first terrible price paid for our journey into the sky, but as we all know, it definitely wouldn't be the last. His sacrifice really did lay the foundation for all the safety rules we just take for granted today. And it leaves you with a really big question, doesn't it? Just how many lessons have to be learned in tragedy before progress can be made safely?